Hi there, and welcome back to English 75A. Hope you're all doing well. We are in week 9, and it's belly of the beast time. Stuff's pouring in. Now more than ever, we have to kind of keep our focus, stay the course as much as we can, and keep making progress forward. Now, I didn't have anybody turn in a discussion post last week. I felt like taking that extra reading and writing energy and putting it into doing some sharp bang up peer reviews and also refining that final draft was more important. And I didn't mind making that shift in focus. Some of you I know still owe me that first essay. I do accept late work. I definitely accept it during this semester. And in general, I will do it without penalty, but don't let that give yourself an excuse to just let it run away with yourself. I'll accept late work without penalty, at least for the essays and quizzes, as long as you communicate with me um, what's going on. I mean, how much detail you want to give me is fine, but what I really need to know is where you are on your essay process, how close you are to being done, and if you want to give me like a quick explanation of why it was difficult for you to get it done on time, um, that always helps. And again, um, this is an important thing to keep in mind. It's a good professional soft skill to have. If you have a project due to your boss and for some reason you are not up on the schedule, you're a little bit behind, it's really important that you communicate with your boss or your supervisor what that new timeline is going to be, why that original deadline is no longer um, is no longer possible for you. Anyway, yeah, my number one goal is making sure everybody in this class gets the material and the skills that are part of the course, pass and move on, and keep making progress towards their educational and career goals. Um, that's my number one concern. And based on that, I'm going to be a little bit um, flexible and hopefully resilient and agile and patient when it comes to how we get these things done. But again, please communicate. I know this is a really weird semester. Hopefully, I've made myself available in enough media that makes it easy for you to want to communicate with me. All right. That was our public service announcement. Why don't we move on and talk a little bit more about Olaudah Equiano? First thing, born in Nigeria and Africa, and was sold to British slavers. There is some dispute about that earliest part of his story. There's no strong documentation for it, and some scholars have suggested that maybe he was not born in Nigeria at all. Uh, at this point in his interesting narrative, we have his word to go by and nothing else. So there's been some speculation on it. I do think that most scholarship is still coming down on his side, is still aligning with his story as presented here. Um, he also fought in the 7 Years' War on the side of on the side of the English as a slave. Ooh, now we got two bullets coming up. He was then sold to a Quaker merchant in Philadelphia. And this is a theme that we're going to see more than once in this course. When we look at slave writers and poets and activists, in general, they're going to come from the North. And in general, they came from households that had a very different notion of slavery than the South. This in no way makes slavery okay, but in general, there was more domestic uh, servitude or domestic slaves working in households. This is true of Equiano. It's also going to be true of Phyllis Wheatley when we take a look at her. Um, and the religious diversity, especially the Quaker tradition, um, and also the Presbyterians, make for, in some ways, a more inclusive and compassionate environment along that spectrum of slavery. There's no way at all I'm saying, oh, these slaves has it good, so slavery's not a problem. I would never, 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 never say that. Uh, Now, the other thing I'm going to say in that bullet that's already appeared is that, through his diligence and business understanding or acumen, that means sharpness and knowledge, he saves enough money to buy his own freedom in 1766. What an interesting feat. After this, he decides he's going to go live in London for a while. Now, remember that London and England in general will be further ahead in abolition than the United States, depending on the kind of documentation you look at and what kinds of definitions and civil actions you consider to be the most central. Britain outlaws slavery in 1802 or 1804. So they're farther along that abolition timeline than the United States is. Equiano gets known as a very powerful and compelling lecturer about the evils of slavery, and he also gets to be known throughout the canon of American literature as the most powerful, the most popular anti-slavery writer and activist before Frederick Douglass comes along. So in a way, what we are seeing here is the beginning of a certain genealogy of writers and activists. And Olaudah Equiano could be seen as the great-grandfather of this particular genealogy. What else do we know about? What? All the bullets at once. Okay, I can deal with this. What else do we need to know about him? His account in Interesting Narrative puts forward many eyewitness accounts he has of just brutal behavior and punishment inflicted upon slaves. And these are very compelling descriptions. You will know, having read through them, that they are not comfortable. And they very profoundly and very vividly show the viciousness and the hypocrisy of of slavery in general, and how it does not really fit into any kind of compassionate or religious sensibility. The other really important point to think about when we look at Equiano is that as a student of Enlightenment thinking, he's using these notions of the Enlightenment to make a strong anti-slavery argument. He talks about all human beings being linked to each other through sentiment and compassion. Remember, this is going along John Locke's lines, right? Also going along John Locke's lines of reasoning is the idea that there are universal human rights, that just by virtue of being a human being, you have certain rights. Whether other forces and powers acknowledge them is different, but this becomes a baseline way of understanding people, and it's based on sentiment and compassion and reason. Again, coming straight out of John Locke. It has nothing to do with what the king or the queen says you should be doing. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with you being a human. You check off that box, you've got rights. And the foment of this kind of thinking really helps push a lot of arguments forward. It really helps people to get behind this cause. It's the idea that we are all created equal under our maker. Sorry, I'm about to lose power here. is a really important democratic impulse, and it's that same kind of democratic impulse, that anti monarchical government impulse that propels American thinking forward, that propels the American Revolution forward. Okay, I'm going to pause this a second while I go ahead and get my power cord in. Okay, now based on this, I'll give you a couple of highlights from the reading that I think are important to think about. If you'll notice on page 737, he cuts away from his regular narrative to put in a couplet. Every leaf and every whispering breath conveyed a foe, and every foe a death. Now, the putting in of these two lines of verse, we've seen in other people. We saw it in John Smith. We saw it in Rowlandson in a certain form. But notice how he is using this kind of literary structure where he is referring to other people who are considered to be well-respected writers. By citing outside sources like this, he's showing that he's well-read, and he's also adding greater depth and greater seriousness, and greater centrality to his work. And, it won't be the last time we see that kind of structure interlaced in our in some of the writers. He does talk about being on the slave ship on page 744. On page 745, he does talk about how scared he was when he saw a clock. So we've got like a very interesting kind of cross-cultural moment there. In addition to that, we also see him reacting to seeing a mirror, and also seeing another slave being who's currently in an iron muzzle, presumably to keep her from speaking. And yes, these were real things. Muzzles we often think of as something that we put on some, animal that, doesn't know not to bite, dogs and so forth. But yeah, human muzzles were unfortunately not uncommon during slavery. And I've got a picture of one right here. That is just one of many images. And, it certainly isn't a pleasant image to look at. I can't look at it too long. But it's important for us to think about, again, the business of slavery also meant, was also interconnected with all kinds of other businesses. Metalwork and smiths benefited from a lot of extra work as related to the slave trade. Shackles, chains, muzzles, all kinds of instruments of restraint. And on page, if you want to talk about a different kind of restraint, I can turn your attention to page 746, right about the middle of the page. He talks about how he wanted, he was given the name Gustavus Vasa by the captain. And he didn't really like that name. He said that he wanted to be called Jacob again. So even then he's moving away from his African name, showing that he at least wants a name that is somehow connected to the culture that he's in now, perhaps for simplicity's sake. But anyway, his master denies him that, and denies him that favor, and ends up giving him cuffs. That doesn't mean, oh, he's got this nice shirt and he's got links on it. Cuff is another word for a punch or a sock, Fisticuffs is an old word for punching or boxing. So even his own name is taken from him. He is not given that right. And that brings us to the importance of language. If you cannot own your own name, part of your personhood, part of you being a human being, is being stripped from you. So it's a very powerful and a very sad moment. That's bringing us up just to about 15 minutes right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it.